Okay, good afternoon. Today I'm talking about effective road safety education of drivers and riders. So before I commence, I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of the Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures and connection to the lands and waters of New South Wales. So I start with a very simple question. What is the goal? Why are we in road safety? It's certainly, to most of us, it's a whole lot more than a job. There's an old saying, if you want to make a small fortune, start with a large fortune and then start a driving school. It's really something we do for passion, and it is something that makes us feel good at the end of the day. It's not just going around showing people test routes. It's really about reducing the road toll and having a positive impact on the lives of young people and keeping them alive, actually. So let's start with what the Driver Trainers Association says on their website about what their goals are. The website states that their goal is to have safe, successful driver education for the New South Wales public. And it specifies a couple of things there in terms of the code of conduct. It talks about punctuality and courtesy and presentation and relations, etc. And it doesn't go too much into the knowledge, skills and attitudes of what makes good driving instruction. So what I'm going to explore today is what does make good driving instruction? How can I be the best instructor that I can be? How can I actually change people's lives and make young drivers and older drivers and everybody in between safer? So essentially today's chat is really going to focus on two things. What are we going to teach and how are we going to teach it? So we'll start by looking at what does a safe driver actually look like? So when we talk about a safe driver, I think there's a lot of things that come to mind, and a lot of things. If you were asked at a Christmas party, what are the things that you focus on with your students? A lot of these words that you see on the screen would pop up. We want to get low risk driving behaviours installed in our new drivers and our experienced drivers. We want to develop hazard perception skills. We want people to understand what driving conditions is and how they can do it. Young drivers and even older drivers need to understand and learn how to manage their peers and work with a car full of people that may not necessarily be thinking as safely as they are. We know that careful and courteous drivers and patient drivers reduce road trauma and road rage. We also need to think about maintaining the car and make sure it's roadworthy. We need to understand the road rules and have good anticipation vehicle skills. So there is a lot in what we try and teach. And so how do we actually put that together into some sort of structured lesson plan? How do we actually deliver it and make sure we cover all aspects of it for our young drivers? So in terms of putting the content together, what do we need to teach and what are those key knowledge, skills and attitudes / abilities of a safe driver? Now, we could sit down and workshop this for weeks and months and do a whole lot of literature reviews and research. But luckily, a lot of this has actually been done for us in that Europe in the early 2000s, the European road safety organisations got together and had it through a project called Project Gadget, which you can Google later, developed what we know as the goals for driver education. So the goals for driver education, as you can see there, there's a matrix, and essentially on the left you see a hierarchy of skills and abilities, and they range from the most basic at the bottom, level 1, which is vehicle control skills, through to personal attributes and characteristics. You'll see as it goes from left to right that it addresses different aspects of those, about what we understand in our behaviours. So The second column there is knowledge and skills, and they're things that we can learn and develop. But as you go across to the right-hand side, you'll see that the third column and the fourth column really is about understanding who we are as people and choices that we make. So let's work through these levels. And as I explain it, I'll give you some of the examples on the screen, but also go into a little bit more depth. So level 1 is the basic vehicle control. And really that's making the car stop, go and steer. And even in that basic level, young drivers pick that up pretty quickly, as we all know, in that first sort of 10 hours of driving. They're getting pretty good at that. And you'll see when you look at these levels too, as soon as I talk about control skills, there's a direct correlation between what you're seeing here and of course, the sections within the Learner Driver Logbook. Some of you are probably thinking that, oh, that's exactly the same as the 4 levels in the logbook. You know, here we are at the basic skills, and the next levels, basic control skills, the next levels traffic skills, and then hazard perception, and then ongoing development. And this is very much exactly what we're looking at here. That basic control stuff is all those skills that are essentially items 1 to 10 in the Learner Logbook. So getting in and out of the car, left and right turns, observation, leaving the curb, basic intersections, all that stuff is in that knowledge skills of level 1. There is also a little bit about vehicle maintenance, as you can see there, understanding tyres and the importance of grip, and a little bit about understanding spatial awareness. How big is this thing that's a car? You know, prior to their learner license, most people have probably only had to manage something the size of a push bike, and suddenly they're a whole lot wider. And we've all experienced the joy of driving past parked cars and feeling like we're about to have a parked vehicle's mirror sitting in our lap. So learners have that challenge of actually developing that spatial awareness. At that point in time, we also start to get them thinking about some of the things that actually increase risk. And they, I mean, that's also reflected in the logbook as well. I mean, understanding that we're trying to develop our skills in a range of weather conditions. So we've got weather as a climatic thing that affects your driving, but also darkness. You could add to that traffic congestion and the like. And the last column there on level 1 in the basic control operational level is really understanding the strengths and weaknesses of basic vehicle control and assessing their own skills. Now that's really, really difficult because they really have nothing. Most learner drivers have nothing to calibrate or judge themselves against. They really self-calibration or miscalibration, as it's often referred to, is that we do get a bit of a disconnect between where we are in reality and where we think we are. So, for example, most learners have heard for 17 years driving's dangerous, driving's difficult, and after 10 hours, they're pretty good at making the car stop, steer, go, and they think, hey, wow, everybody tells me that's driving's really hard, I'm finding it really easy, therefore I must be good at it. And it's very easy to get sucked into that thinking, particularly if you're just looking at those basic vehicle controls. But as the learner develops and as they graduate with more experience and sort of a depth and breadth of what they're learning, we can move then into more complex situations such as traffic. And you'll see that takes us up into level 2 in the hierarchy, where we start looking at, in terms of knowledge and skills, where our learner is starting to get an understanding of the road rules, who gives way where, who has to stop, what roundabouts do and how they work, understanding things like traffic lights and all those things merging and all those complex rules. They then start to get an idea about really critical interaction skills such as safety margins, like crash avoidance space. How much space do they need in front? How much do they need to the side? This is where that first starting of some of those risk factors that result in crashes starts to kind of come into our teaching, where we start talking about decision making, and of course that's reflected in the criteria within the driving test, where we're talking about gap selection, we're talking about merging choices, also their ability to maintain a focus and divert their attention to various tasks, and we talk about task loading and shedding tasks, and trying to balance all those things so they can keep the speed under the speed limit, but also keep with the traffic flow. And this is where they start to find that they're getting a little bit of overload, and we need to back it back sometimes. In this self-evaluation space, they'll start to actually realise that there are areas in their traffic that they feel confident, but there's also areas where they feel uncomfortable. And part of our job as instructors, of course, is getting them to, even at this early stage, so we might be talking 12 hours in the car or even less, we need to start them getting this self-evaluation thing, because as I've said many times to this cohort, driving instructors, our job as driving instructors is to prepare our learners for the day when we're not sitting in the car. And certainly the key to that is understanding their own limitations and having good calibration of their own skills. Now, the next level up, this is an interesting level when we talk about strategic level. The level I just talked about was you'll see in brackets there in the first column, tactical. The next level is strategic. So I think tactically we can think about things that most people would define as defensive driving. So aim high, see the whole scene, keep the eyes on the move, as taught in the Smith system, developed in the 50s in the UK, or as taught in Hendon and the UK system, things like check course, mirrors, brakes, consider evasive action. That's all tactical stuff that you're doing as you approach a hazard. But a strategic level is really thinking, what could I do to prevent a crash? Not here and now, not even 10 seconds earlier, but an hour earlier. What could I do? What could I have done yesterday or this morning before I even left to change the risk level? And so one of the activities that we use in rider training is around having a conversation of, you're a new learner rider and you've got to, for the first time, ride your motorcycle into the city because you're starting work early in this new job. How could you reduce risk? And there's some obvious things you could do. You could drive that route instead of on the motorcycle as a high risk vulnerable road user. You could drive there on a quiet day, Sunday afternoon, understand the route that way. You could Google Drive it, sit there with your mouse and try not to get to sit driving all the way, watching Google Maps zoom along. You could look at other ways of reducing risk. Maybe you look at and go, okay, today the risks are too great. I'm not going to drive the car. I'm going to catch the train, and that's going to so there you can see modal choices about what is actually the safest mode for the journey that I want to take. So we're moving to a different level than just the tactical, where we're starting to analyse potential risk and mitigation factors that we can instigate well before we even get to the situation, in the vehicle where we're going, oh no, what do I do? The car's pulled out. Maybe it's simply as simple as, well, I need to get home tonight. It's dark. There's two ways I can go home, either the long way around the freeway where it's well lit and it's multi-lane and it's a good surface, or if I take the shortcut through the country back streets, then I might have the risks of animals or not seeing road potholes or things on the surface. So even at that level, every single route we can make a choice. Every single time we get in the car, we can make a choice at a strategic level how we might manage risk, and that even which lane we choose to drive in. So that strategic level is one of those levels that we don't touch on enough in some driving instructors do, but I think it's fair to say that often the pressures of trying to get people to that line where they're doing the test really stops us addressing that. But it's the area we're going to have a lot of road safety benefit, particularly when we start getting to the other areas such as risk increasing factors and self-evaluation. So in terms of that strategic level, you know, thinking about what's my mental state today? Am I exhausted? Am I angry? Am I trying to impress people? This is where we talk about peer influence. And of course, we moved away from calling it peer pressure because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a pressure in terms of always making something bad happen. It can be a positive peer influence in a social context where you know, there's a lot of evidence to show that young drivers will drive more sensibly when their partner is in the vehicle, as opposed to if they're in the vehicle with peers of the same gender, for example. Not forgetting that people can have partners in the same gender, of course, but yeah, really looking at that and going, okay, that social context is going to be a change of influence. If we've got a bunch of rowdy mates, then we know it's a high risk. If we've got someone that's really concerned about our well-being and we're concerned about their well-being, then of course we might change our behaviours and how we drive as well. That last category of self-evaluation is also really delving down into your own thinking and what motivates you, and that's really hard to get particularly young drivers to delve into that level. The top level is probably the hardest of all, and I think in most driving lessons we can't touch in that, but we can always sow the seeds and we can try and have conversations where conversations arise to those. So look, I spent a bit of time in that. There's a reference there that reference is an adaptation that Teresa Sinceric and myself did for part of the design of the Victorian motorcycle scheme. But if you just Google the GDE matrix or the project CIECA, which was the International Commission for Driver Testing, that they did the Project Gadget. Either of those things will lead you to some of that information, most of it. So we've just talked about what we need to teach. So the next obvious question is, how do we need to teach it? What's effective? Now, historically, we've talked about pedagogy. Now, let's talk about other gogies. So what do I mean by that? So pedagogy is really teacher-led learning. And that is, let's put it simply, traditionally how primary school might work. But realistically, how are learners that are 8, 18 and 80, how are those learners different? In some ways they're the same, but in other ways they're very different. When we talk about older learners, we tend to talk about andragogy, which is really self-directed learners who are, if you like, adult learners. Don't get me wrong, this doesn't have to be age specific. You can certainly get a self-directed 10-year-old, particularly if something grabs your attention and they're highly motivated. But for the most part, when we go through that adolescent development phase, as our brain rewires as we move from being a child to an adult, our learning style changes. And probably the biggest thing is that we start to ask, why? Why do I need to learn this? What's in it for me? How is this going to help me going forward? These are questions that an adult learner will ask, and you as their educator need to answer and need to lead with. Because if we don't lead with the value of what's in it for them and why they need to know the information, they're going to immediately have no motivation and not be engaged. We also need to appreciate that adult learners come with baggage. They come with experience. They've seen things happen in the real world. I had one of my lecturers once say the reason they love teaching adults is because they've all had, you know, good things, horrific things, happy moments, sad moments. They've all gone through traumas. They've got real life under their belt. And that gives people the ability to connect new ideas to their experiences, and that'll help reinforcement and understanding, and not only understanding but retention and application. Adult learners also need to have a roadmap. They need to know where their learning is going. So it can't just be a bunch of facts sprayed up on a screen or a lesson we just go, oh, I'm talking about roundabouts today. It really needs to have a context where today we're going to look at roundabouts, and the reason we're looking at roundabouts is because there's a heap of them in this suburb, and even if there's not, if you travel further afield, you're going to come across them, and they've got their own special, unique laws that we need to be able to understand so we can keep ourselves safe. So, we need that roadmap, we need that reason for learning, and we need to recognise that adult learners come with baggage. And in that too, I might add that they also come with barriers to learning, because they'll have their own biases and preconceived ideas around some of the stuff. For example, following distance. They've had 17 years sitting in a car as a passenger, and they've seen what sort of following distance people keep out there on the public street. So they'll have an assumption that 2 car lengths off the car up front at 80 k's is absolutely fine, because that's what everybody does. So we need to look at ways we can actually address that. You'll see on the screen there that there's a couple of other points. Pedagogy, self-managed learners. Now that's something, that's people who seek out this information by themselves. From a trainer's point of view, they're great, because they're the ones that come to you with questions saying, oh, I looked up on the road rules last night and I found the legislation website, and did you know blah, blah, blah? And you're, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. And they're ones that will, they're great if every now and then you get a learner that's really self-managed and driving their own learning experience. We'll talk about those more in a second, but let's talk about that last little box on the bottom left there, which talks about transitioning from instructing to training to coaching mentor. Because I want to go into that in detail, in that realistically, we call ourselves driving instructors. Some of us call ourselves driver training, but really there's a whole bunch of ways that we can impart knowledge to other people. So let's have a look at those, and I'll put up a bit of a continuum. This continuum, and look, this is just something I made up a few years ago. It's been utilised in a few places. You would have seen it around, but realistically, we've got at one end an educator-focused model where presenter, that in that context, I'm talking about a presenter who, like this, there's no audience interaction. I'm presenting to a group that can't ask questions. Could be, I'm presenting to a stadium of 3,000 people on, the annual report for the, huge multi-million-dollar company, or a new product launch or something like that. So, a presentation where it's really deliverer focused. There's no interaction with the audience. There's no interaction with the learners. You just get what you get, and you don't get upset. So that's that presenter one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is a learner focused, and I've got their self-managed learner where the person's basically driving the whole experience himself, and there's no other party, just the learner. So in that continuum, a whole bunch of models. Now, you could shift them up and down, our own understanding of the language. You might put trainer ahead of instructor or coach, but on the right of teacher. It doesn't really matter. But when I'm talking about instructor, I'm talking about a very didactic model where you basically say, this is this. I am going to teach you these things. And it's very one-sided. Now, that differs from a trainer in that a trainer may be taking on slightly more personal. You can think of a personal trainer. I did a lot of training with guys in the police, and They had weapons trainers, and they had very structured, by the end of the lesson, you will know. They had that sort of model. But, often trainers would think of personal trainers was where there's an interaction, or there's this connection that leads us towards that kind of coach, like a swimming coach. So those three, you can shuffle them around, but at the end of the day, you've got a set curriculum, you've got set things you need to cover. You tend to be very specific, and this is what we're going to learn. This is how we're going to learn it. You're going to have a bit of a structured lesson plan where you're going through the introduction, explanation, demonstration, bit of practice, some feedback, bit of a link to the next lesson. You'll have those sort of structures. And generally, we tend to operate in the instructor end of the world at the very early stages of the learning experience. Why? Predominantly because of safety. When we're starting out that first journey of, move off and stop, leave and return to curb, left and right turns, we're seeking a high level of control for safety. But as the learner develops skills, we're going to move along towards that coach model where we're introducing a couple of things, a lot more interaction, where we're actually asking them a lot more questions and getting them thinking. And we're also asking a lot more evaluation and reflection. So in that space, like an instructor might say, okay, two examples here, an instructor might say, we're going to leave the gutter, the curb. I want you to pull in this traffic stream. What I want you to do, you can use the acronym MISS. Mirrors indicate shoulder check steer. So I want you to look at your center mirror now. Your side mirror, you can pop your indicator on for 5 seconds. You have your head check over your shoulder, right shoulder, because we're pulling out from the gutter here. So that's where the traffic will be, and off we go. And that's a very instructional model. Whereas a coaching model might be, okay, we're going to leave and join the traffic now. What do you think some of the risks might be? What are the dangers we're looking for? And the learner might say, passing cars. So you might say, well, how are we going to check for passing cars? Where do we check? And they might say, the side mirror. And you might say, okay, well, what about the center mirror as well? Why not have a look in the centimeter, then the side mirror, and sweep your head across? And they may go, yeah, well, that's enough. And go, well, have you ever heard of a blind spot check? Did you know that there's a blind spot there? And then you might have a conversation about that. And then you might say, okay, well, what else could help us check that it's safe? And how could we tell others what we're intending to do? And they might say a signal. And yeah, great idea. We could do signals. What do you know about signals? How long do you have to signal for? And they might say, I don't know. Or, well, you did your knowledge test on the computer. What was that? And they might say, oh yeah, 5 seconds. So there's a couple of things about that. Obviously, that whole conversation piece is going to take longer. And a lot of instructors, particularly on those early lessons, tend to go for instructional because it's quicker and they want to get more in like content. But there's a couple of things, the value of the coaching model. Yeah, sure, it takes a bit longer. But if they're engaged and if you're having those conversations, firstly, that's tapping into their experiences. They've got some of that knowledge. Secondly, they're getting ownership of that learning because they're contributing to it. You can also do a bit of a validation in terms of what do they already know. They might say, oh yeah, dad told me, mum told me, I need to know this. And so you can actually go, oh yeah, absolutely, spot on. Yeah, 5 seconds is what you need. That's great that you know that. So you can actually use that coaching model to build rapport and get that greater depth of learning. Now, there's a few things, the studies around this, and again, 5 seconds, I won't go into all the research paper about it, but 5 seconds of Googling on the internet will show you that the evidence is that you get more of a lasting and more effective behavioural change using a coaching model rather than an instructional model. And so if we're really trying to get people to change behaviours, such as, leave a better following distance or not speed, or, create space from hazards, then realistically we need to look at a model where they're engaged, where they've got higher motivation, where they've got greater buy-in. And I'd encourage you to think how you can actually use that coaching methodology across all your learning, because it's not something you just introduce in the last few lessons. It's something that I find I use on lesson 1 in the first 2 seconds of teaching. When I meet a learner, I'm in a coaching mindset. I'll quickly map that mindset against where we were, and realistically you'll see that as we move up those levels, we really need to think about moving through those methodologies. So yeah, at that basic level, you are sometimes having to go into that instructor trainer kind of mode, particularly if you've gone into heavy traffic and you need to maintain safety. You might be saying, okay, check your mirrors now, okay, pop your indicator on now, and you're very controlling. But when they get more experience, you might say, okay, coming up to this intersection, what are some of the things we've got to do? And they're like, oh, I need to check behind. What else do you need to do? I need to indicate. So again, getting them to think about it, getting the reflection. And as you move up through those different levels in the GDR, Goals for Driver Education matrix, in that hierarchy, you'll see that you can, that third column, we're moving from coach to maybe facilitator to teacher to mentor, where, those of you who've done the Safer Driver course, where you're looking at the mentoring model, such as GROW, goal, reality, opportunity, way forward. So GROW, GROW, goal, reality, opportunity, way forward. Those conversations, those mentoring conversations, are the sort of things that you might start having with your learner once you've maybe had 6 or 7 conversations, like lessons with them, and you're building rapport and you're starting to build those thoughts. So I just want to leave you with one last slide, which kind of sums up where I've been today, and that is, how are you going to do it differently in the car tomorrow? Really, I've tried to get us having a conversation, get us thinking about what we're currently doing, what we do well, what we could improve on. Maybe some of you got a lot out of that. Maybe some of you just got one gem. Regardless, whether you got a lot, a little, or nothing, how are you going to make your teaching better tomorrow? And that's the question I want to leave you with. What are you going to do differently with your next learner and the learner after that, and after that, to make them safer and to make the road safer for all of us? Thank you for your time today.